and welcome back to the deepest lore of the Legend of Zelda. This time we're walking into an old Hyrule with a new hero to fight back the same evil we always have. This is the deepest lore of A Link to the Past. A Link to the Past, known as Triforce of the Gods in Japanese, was released for the Super Famicom on November 21st, 1991. It was later remade on the Game Boy Advance, packaged with the original version of 4 swords. We will be covering the Game Boy Advance version, but we will hold off on covering 4 swords, as that's really its own game and deserves its own video. The manual for this game starts back at the very beginning, the creation of the universe itself. It details how 3 golden goddesses, one of power, one of wisdom, and one of courage, brought life and order to a chaotic world, creating the landscapes, laws, and life forms that would go on to define it. Upon completing this task, they once again left the world, leaving behind the Triforce, a physical manifestation of their life force, to uphold the land. This is as good a place as any to mention that, despite what the English manual says, the Triforce is actually a sentient being, or more accurately, 3 sentient beings combined together. The Japanese manual even gives each part its own name, roughly translated to the Conqueror of Power, the Governor of Wisdom, and the Forger of Courage. The Triforce was left in a holy place known as the Sacred Realm, also known as the Golden Land, awaiting someone worthy of wielding it and having any desire of theirs granted. But there were also prophecies of something darker, a figure known in Japanese as the Great Calamity. And yes, that name should sound familiar, who would claim the Triforce and cast the Golden Land into shadow. According to legend, a hero of the bloodline of the Knights of Hyrule will emerge when the Great Calamity has appeared and claim the Triforce. This hero will carry 3 symbols of virtue and successfully draw the Master Sword. He would face the Calamity in a final duel of fate. If the hero were to win, the Calamity's hold on the Golden Land would vanish, and the Triforce would wait for a new owner. However, if the hero were to fall, then the Light World would be eternally forfeit to the Calamity's dark desires. The prophecy also foretold specific items the hero would need to complete his quest, including the Pendants of Virtue, the Moon Pearl, the Magic Mirror, and the Book of Mudora. Also, small note here, while the Golden Goddesses have existed in all languages since this title, the Japanese script implies the existence of some overarching patron deity of Hyrule as well, one who commanded the creation of what would become the Master Sword. It seems that Hylia, the goddess who we in the West were unaware of until Skyward Sword, has actually been part of the series far longer than most of us were aware. There's also a line that directly connects the royal family to Hylia, which becomes much more relevant when you learn what happened to Hylia in Skyward Sword. Just a side note I wanted to share. Anyways, this history was carried on into legend, with the Triforce being remembered as an object capable of granting the deepest wishes within a person's heart, and allowing them to command the power of the gods. Many dreamed of finding it and taking that power, and many people hunted for this golden power of the gods. Centuries before the events of the game, the Golden Land was stumbled upon accidentally by a group of thieves. Seeing the power waiting for them, the thieves slaughtered each other in hopes of taking it all for themselves, until only one remained, their leader, a man named Ganondorf, a murderous thief who was known throughout Hyrule by the name Ganon. Now the Triforce, despite having the power of the gods and its own sentience, was not allowed to judge the moral character of those who wished upon it, only the balance of their hearts between power, wisdom, and courage. And since Ganon had a balanced heart, it allowed him to seize its sacred might for himself and make his wish. Ganon wished to become the Demon King, the supreme ruler of the underworld, and claim dominion over the demons that made their home there. His dark will corrupted the Golden Land, transforming it into a new form, the Dark World, which heavily resembled the Underworld, domain of demons and a place completely absent of the god's presence and light. However, despite the power he now wielded, Ganon wasn't able to leave this new world. He'd only stumbled into it by chance in the first place. He had no idea how he'd entered or how to leave. Frantically, Ganon began searching for a way back into the Light World in order to use his newfound power to conquer it. But despite Ganon claiming the golden power, many from Hyrule continued searching for it. And upon being drawn into the Dark World, became trapped in new and monstrous forms that reflected the contents of their own hearts. Over time, the influence of Ganon's malice grew stronger, seeping back into the light world and causing dark clouds to form over Hyrule. The king of Hyrule, fearing for his nation, called upon 7 powerful sages, and tasked them with stopping the mysterious power from seeping out of the Dark World. The sages did consider fighting the Master Sword, a powerful artifact the manual says was forged at the command of a god to vanquish demons and protect the Triforce to slay Ganon. However, they were unable to find any hero worthy of wielding the sword, nor did they have time to search for such a champion, as Ganon's malice had already began to encircle the castle. This situation actually sounds very familiar. Instead, they sought to simply close the door used by the thieves, a dimensional gate tied to the castle itself. They approached the portal, protected by the Knights of Hyrule, and were able to use their powerful magics to seal it shut. However, in the process, almost all the Knights of Hyrule had perished protecting the sages. This war would go down in history as the Imprisoning War. Centuries later, the Imprisoning War had become not more than legend, and the Dark World remained silent, at least for a time. Over those years, the blood of Hylia faded in Hyrule's people, and most lost the magical prowess and distinct pointed ears of their ancestors. Not long before the events of the game began, disasters again began to strike Hyrule. Plagues, droughts, and more hit the land, though the seal from the Imprisoning War seemed to remain intact. The people prayed to the gods for deliverance. Instead, they found safety not in the hands of a god, but of a man, a priest by the name of Agonim, who used his strange magic to stop the disasters plaguing Hyrule. The people were overjoyed, and the king, believing Agonim to be the second coming of the second sages told of in legend, invited him into the castle, more or less turning over control of the land to this mysterious priest. But it would not be long before Agonim's true intentions would come to light. At this time, the only remaining descendants of the slain Knights of Hyrule were a young boy named Link and his uncle, who lived simple lives just south of Hyrule Castle. However, on a particularly dark and stormy night, Link woke up to the voice of a girl appearing in his dreams. The voice claimed to be Zelda, Princess of Hyrule, and she said that she had been imprisoned inside the castle. Upon waking, Link found his uncle preparing to leave. He told Link to remain in the cottage, but the child knew that something needed to be done, and soon after left to make his own way to the castle. Inside its walls, Link found his uncle at death's door, having tried the exact same thing and becoming mortally wounded by the castle soldiers. The two shared a heartfelt moment together, where, with his dying breath, Link's uncle told him of their true heritage, that they descended from the Knights of Hyrule, and that they had a duty to protect the royal family. Taking his uncle's sword and a shield passed down their family for generations, Link went on to finish the quest his uncle had begun. The boy valiantly fought his way into the castle dungeons and freed the Princess Zelda, escaping with her to a sanctuary north of the castle. She explained that Agonim had betrayed her father the king, killing him and bewitching the soldiers, and more or less seizing the throne for himself. He sent the soldiers out for a hunt for the descendants of the 7 sages of old, ultimately settling on taking hostage 7 young maidens. He then began sacrificing them one by one in order to weaken the seal on the Dark World. He succeeded in sacrificing the first 6, but the 7th, Princess Zelda herself, had managed to escape with the aid of this young hero. She beseeched Link to find and claim the Master Sword, and use it to stop Agonim before he could finish the job. Meanwhile, Link was branded a wanted criminal by Agonim, with proclamations issued claiming that Link had kidnapped the princess, setting the entire world against him. Working with Sahasrahla, the respected elder of Kakariko village and a descendant of the 7 sages, Link was able to prove his worth by finding the 3 pendants of virtue hidden in heavily guarded labyrinths throughout Hyrule. Along the way, Link himself ended up finding a portal to the Dark World, being transformed into a form reflective of his soul, a rabbit. The exact reason as to why could probably be its own video. I actually removed a huge tangent about the moon symbolism from this script, so let me know if you want all of that. The 3 virtues extolled are power, wisdom, and courage, representing the 3 pieces of the Triforce, and proving Link's balanced heart. After having collected all 3, he brought them to the Master Sword's pedestal in the Lost Woods, allowing him to draw the Blade of Evil's Bane and wield it as his own. However, this came too late. Just after Link claimed the sword, Zelda had been found by Agonim's bewitched soldiers and taken back to the castle to have her soul sacrificed to the Dark World, and in doing so, destroy the seal that prevented escape from that ruined land. Using the might of the Master Sword to dispel Agonim's magical barriers and storm Hyrule Castle's tower, Link arrived just in time to see the ritual completed, before challenging Agonim to a duel. The two had an epic battle, and Link defeated the priest, though not early enough to prevent his plan from going into motion. In a last-ditch effort to stop Link from closing the seal, Agonim used his magic to drag Link into the Dark World through the newly reopened portal in Hyrule Castle. With the seal broken and the portal reopened, the corruption of the Light World would grow faster. At this point, the only way to stop the corruption and keep Calamity from taking hold forever was for Link to claim the Golden Power for himself, and use it to halt the corruption of both the Dark and Light Worlds. To do this, he would have to save the 7 maidens who had been sent here before him, so they could remove the magical protections on Ganon's tower, and allow him to seize the Triforce by killing its current master. As he traveled to the 7 temples hidden in the Dark World and rescued the maidens, Link slowly began to unravel the mystery of what was going on. The maidens told him that Ganon was the current master of both the Triforce and Agonim, and how the priest's sacrifices had opened the portal to the Dark World so Ganon could escape into the light. Link learned of his place in the prophecy of the Great Calamity, and what was at stake if he lost. The maidens shared how Ganon's plan was nearly flawless, but he had made one fatal error. He had assumed that the bloodline of the Knights of Hyrule had been truly eradicated. It was not until far too late he had learned of the existence of Link, descendant of the Knights and hero of prophecy, and how a chance of the Demon King's downfall still remained. And once the 7 maidens Zelda included were freed, they could dispel the magic barrier guarding Ganon's tower, allowing Link to ascend it and finally face his foe. At the top though, he found not the monstrous Ganon, but instead Agonim, once more trying to allow the Demon King to gain his freedom. But this time the Priest of Ganon was different. In the Japanese, he spoke in an entirely different tone from his earlier appearances, foregoing formal honorifics and talking like a ne'er-do-well, or a bandit. Upon killing Agonim once and for all, Link watched as Ganon's spirit left the body of the priest, revealing Agonim had been possessed outright by Ganon after sending Link to the Dark World. Immediately, Ganon made his way towards the pyramid in the center of the Dark World, where the two would have their final confrontation. Link, using the sword forged long before even the imprisoning war, followed in hot pursuit, defeating the Demon King and finishing him off with a silver arrow, one of the few weapons capable of putting him in the ground for good. Notably, this is the same way Ganon was killed in the original Legend of Zelda. The world was saved, and the Triforce itself was found within the pyramid by Link. The Triforce began to speak with Link, revealing the story of how Ganon claimed it to the hero, before it accepted Link as its new master. We don't know exactly what Link wished for, but it seems that he desired to undo all of the evil caused by Ganon. Numerous characters, including Link's uncle, are returned from the dead. The denizens of the Dark World, once prisoners trapped in monstrous forms, were freed and returned to the Light World. The Dark World reverted to its original state as the Golden Land, but now blessed with a bright blue sky. Curses placed by Ganon were lifted, allowing the world to be freed from his influence entirely. Peace was finally restored to Hyrule, and the Master Sword returned to its eternal slumber. A Link to the Past is really the game that created the Zelda series as we know it today. It fleshed out the history and motivation of Ganon, the looming villain we saw in both NES titles. We saw more about the Triforce as well. This game is the first to not only show the true power of wielding the entire Triforce and establish that it grants wishes, but also shows that it's sentient, with the artifact speaking to Ganon in the manual, as well as Link at the end of the game. We also got an early version of the creation story that would eventually be retold in Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. More generally, we also see more of the Hyrulean religion, finally establishing without question that multiple deities exist. At this point, the religion of Hyrule was almost completely divorced from the Christian imagery so popular in the early games of the franchise. The goddess statue from Adventure of Link is kept, but wouldn't reappear for a long, long while. This game also introduces two of Link's most iconic items, the Master Sword and the Hylian Shield. Discussing the latter first, it was just a basic blue shield stated to have been passed through Link's family line, and given to the hero by his dying uncle. However, in the 2019 remake of Link's Awakening, the exact same shield from this game reappears, but this time featuring the Hylian shield design that would eventually become prevalent throughout the series. The Master Sword would go on to become one of the most iconic pieces of weaponry in the entire franchise, wielded by numerous iterations of the hero's spirit. As stated earlier in this video, all we learn about its backstory is that it was forged by the will of a powerful god to fight demons and protect the golden power from them. We'll cover this more later when we get to the actual origin of the Master Sword and Skyward Sword. Also, some people may ask if this sword is the same as the Magical Sword, the most powerful sword featured in both Zelda 1 and Adventure of Link. The short answer is no. Both weapons look extremely different and have distinct names in the Japanese, even in more recent re-releases of the NES games. The Master Sword is also kept in a pedestal, slumbering eternally, whereas the Magical Sword is kept secreted away in an underground tomb. Interestingly, the overworld map for this game somewhat lines up with the original Legend of Zelda. To the far north of the map, we have the Death Mountain area, including Spectacle Rock, which served as Ganon's main base of operations during that game. The location of this base actually lines up with both the Tower of Hera in the Light World and Ganon's Tower in the Dark World, implying he may have used the same location in both titles. Both maps also have a Lost Woods area, though they don't act the same, and likely aren't meant to be the same Eldritch location, despite sharing a name. You could draw more comparisons between the maps if you wanted. I've seen many people attempt it, myself included, but the maps aren't really close enough to be one-to-one. Zelda maps have always been inconsistent, and that goes back as far as this game. It would be too much to try and draw those parallels for every game in the series. The title established the gameplay and formula that would go on to rule the franchise until Breath of the Wild released 26 years later. The themed dungeons throughout the game world, a mid-game plot shakeup at the ending of the first arc that introduces a darker, altered version of the world map, as well as a bunch of new dungeons to explore. It was also the first game to feature important boss fights in both the highest tower of Hyrule Castle, and in a separate tower both designed by and named for Ganon. Actually, this seems to be a common thing on Super Nintendo. A lot of major franchises that debuted earlier on were completely redefined in this era, including Metroid, Fire Emblem, Donkey Kong, and even Mario itself. This era was a massive shakeup for the entire company, and would be the basis for a lot of what would come out of Nintendo for the next few decades. But not only did this game establish the gameplay precedent for the next few decades, but also the lore. This was the game that really gave us an introduction to Ganon as a character, including his true goals and his backstory as Ganondorf. We learn about the cosmology of the world, and in doing so, get background for the Triforce and the Master Sword. These three elements are essentially what the entire lore will revolve around from this point on, and forms most of the story connection between games. The one thing that became apparent to me when looking back at this game is how much of the lore was scrubbed in translation. And that's not just a thing in A Link to the Past. Many other details get cut in translation throughout the series. As usual, I'll be sticking to the Japanese lore, since that was the intention of the developers. I urge anyone doing their own research into the Zelda lore to look at the Japanese scripts and manuals more than the English ones. I'll link translations of both the game script and the manual in the description of this video. If I forget to do so, then feel free to yell at me in the comments, on Twitter, on the Discord, whatever. Looking at the timeline, we can safely place this game earlier than the two we've covered previously. Not only do the Japanese manual and box refer to this game as a prequel to the original titles, but we can just see from the state of the world. The Triforce is in one piece, which means that Princess Zelda I has not yet been sealed in North Palace. We are also given the creation story of the world, and told that the Triforce is placed in the Sacred Realm at the dawn of time. We're left to conclude that it was after the events of this game that the royal family kept the Triforce to themselves, and passed it down as an heirloom, as was shown in the Adventures of Link manual. We do actually see it explicitly confirmed that the Triforce became a royal heirloom at some point after A Link to the Past, but we won't be covering that game for a very, very long while. While Ganon was killed during the events of this game, it was made clear in Zelda 2 that he can be resurrected. And that's actually a storyline we'll explicitly see play out in the Oracle games. And with that, we have finally hit the end of this video. When next we return to Zelda, it won't be in Hyrule, but instead dreamy Koholint Island, home of the Windfish in Link's Awakening. But for our very next episode of The Deepest Lore, we're shifting gears to be something completely different by looking at Super Mario Kart. If you're excited for that, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of when that video releases. You can also tell me what you think of this one by liking the video or commenting down below. If you want to continue the conversation, I have a Discord server link in the description, and you're more than welcome to join up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see all of you next time.